Before I start, I want to give a quick shout out to our Twitter account. If you want to make sure that you never miss out on one of our videos, then consider following us on Twitter, where we regularly post exclusive updates and content. You can follow us at TLDR News UK. So I've been saying this for a while now, but it's never been more true. Time is running out for Brexit. In fact, there are only 11 weeks left until the UK is set to leave the EU on the 29th of March 2019, which means there's not many weeks left for us to cash in with Brexit videos. Also, more importantly, with 11 weeks left, you'd hope that the UK will be a bit further through the negotiations process. I imagine Theresa May and her Conservative Party were rather hoping that a withdrawal deal would have been agreed by this point, allowing for them to move on to negotiating the trade relationship between the EU and UK post-Brexit. But the UK and EU haven't been able to agree on a withdrawal deal yet, let alone any discussions about future relationships. Because there's so little time left, it's looking increasingly likely that the UK might not reach an agreement with the EU before the deadline is reached. It's possible that the two sides could agree to extend the deadline, or a deal could be reached despite the limited time left, or the UK could agree to abandon Brexit altogether. But the UK leaving with no deal at all is a real possibility. Some argue that leaving without a deal could actually be okay for the UK, and we'll be discussing that in a video next week. For now though, I only want to discuss what would happen after a no-deal Brexit. No opinions here, just what would actually happen on the 30th of March if no deal is agreed to. Well, a no-deal Brexit is exactly what it sounds like. The UK leaves the EU without having any deals in place. Overnight, it goes from being a full member of the EU to not having any connections with the bloc at all. The UK and EU previously agreed to a 21-month transition period, but in the event of a no-deal Brexit, that all goes away. And on the 30th of March 2019, the UK will have fully left the EU. This very sudden change could prove difficult for the UK's citizens, businesses, and even government. The government has begun to plan for a no-deal Brexit, getting ready for every eventuality. They're hoping that these plans will never need to be implemented, and as such, we don't know that much about them yet. Despite not knowing the government's exact plans, we do know how a no-deal Brexit is likely to affect Britain. So let's stop being vague. What kind of difficulties are we likely to observe? Currently, businesses trade freely between the UK and EU. Goods don't need to be checked at the border and aren't subject to tariffs. This means that trading between the UK and EU is very simple. In the event of a hard Brexit, this frictionless border goes away, and the UK would have no official trading relationship with the EU. Trade between the two would no longer be subject to customs deals, which aim to keep trade smooth and prevent quotas and tariffs. Instead, trade would operate under World Trade Organization rules. This is actually something we discussed at length in another video, and I'd recommend if you're interested checking out that video, because it's far too complex a topic for us to dive deep into here. The basics are that under WTO rules, both sides would have to begin placing tariffs on each other and completing customs checks at the borders. That's not just the EU being difficult. WTO rules mean that if the EU gave the UK preferential treatment, they would have to do the same to all of the other countries they don't have deals with. The only way the UK could get preferential trading terms with the EU under WTO rules is to negotiate a custom deal, and considering how well negotiations are going at the moment, that could take some time. UK farmers would likely be hit especially hard, with their exports to the EU facing tariffs of 30 to 40%, effectively killing their EU export market. The UK would also lose all of the trade deals it got via the EU, meaning they'd have to negotiate fresh trade deals with every country. The EU has trade deals with a huge number of countries. In fact, currently, they only operate under WTO rules with 12 countries. So the UK would lose a whole lot of deals overnight, as well as effectively losing trade deals with all of the other EU member nations. The UK would no longer be bound to the EU's rules and regulations, so it would be able to formulate new deals however they wished. But this would inevitably take time, and at least in the short term, losing all of the EU's deals very suddenly could be damaging. Due to trade issues, customers can expect to see prices in stores rise, affecting food like meats and dairy especially hard. The UK's reliance on the EU for imported food would likely lead to delays and price increases. Because of the potential trade issues, the UK government began to stockpile medicines, and many British people and businesses are already stockpiling food. There are concerns that difficulties at the border could disrupt trade and supply chains, which could lead to shortages of food and medicines. While many put this down to scaremongering from Project Fear, stocking up seems like a sensible measure. With no guardrails in place, a no-deal Brexit could make trade incredibly complex, especially for restricted items such as medicines. Even if medicines were only delayed for a few days, this could prove catastrophic for those who rely on specific drugs to stay alive. Even if it doesn't end up being an issue, it seems perfectly reasonable to be cautious and stock up on vital supplies. It's not just those who rely on medicines who will be affected by a no-deal Brexit. EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU would also be impacted. There are around 1.3 million UK citizens currently living in the EU, and another 3.7 million EU citizens living in the UK. And their fate after a no-deal Brexit isn't entirely clear at the moment. Once the UK has left, the EU's free movement laws will no longer apply to the UK, and citizens will no longer have automatic rights to live in each other's countries. As such, it's possible that people will have to begin returning to their country of origin. Uncertainty, which in itself is a great concern to many citizens living abroad. Essentially though, if there's no deal, citizens living abroad would find themselves becoming illegal aliens in the country they live, losing their right to live and work overnight. Both sides have made it clear they don't want to see this happening, but in a pure no-deal scenario, there's not much that can be done. Much like the transition plan we discussed earlier, if there's no deal in place, all of the contingency plans fall through too. It's not just those living in other countries who would face challenges. Simply travelling between the UK and EU could become difficult. In theory, a no-deal Brexit would lead to planes being grounded between the EU and UK. This is because the UK would no longer be part of the EU's single aviation market, and as such, UK planes would no longer be able to land in the EU. In fact, some airlines have started to include Brexit clauses into tickets sold after the 29th of March, saying that these tickets might not be valid due to the disruption caused by a no deal. Most people don't think that the UK and EU would let things get this far, with the UK Department of Transport and the EU saying that they plan to get a bare bones deal agreed, and therefore neither expects any planes to actually end up grounded. In fact, at the end of December, the EU published new legislation to help smooth the transition, even in the event of a no deal. The sticking point in these new laws is that there can be no additional flights added between the UK and any EU country. So for example, if there were 10 flights a day between the UK and Sweden in 2018, there couldn't be any more than that in 2019. This could prove difficult for the UK, with many airlines already selling tickets for an increased number of flights in 2019. And it's not even just people who will be affected. Goods travelling through UK and EU ports could also be hit. Many predict huge disruptions at UK ports, who wouldn't be able to handle the number of customs checks suddenly required. The sudden nature of a no-deal Brexit makes things even harder in this area. Gone is the transition period which would let the UK develop some more long-term solutions, such as the high-tech scanning systems used between Norway and Sweden. With little time left, the UK is beginning to discuss more rudimental plans, like building new lorry parks in Kent to hold the waiting lorries, and ports sending additional boats to act as an overflow for excess lorries. That being said, even if technological solutions were implemented, each check would likely still take around 10 minutes, a small but significant delay when applied to the estimated 4.2 million lorries travelling between the UK and EU every year. The Irish border has been one of the biggest issues when it comes to Brexit, with the backstop holding up the deal for months. Both sides have said that they don't want to see the return of a hard border, but in the event of a no-deal Brexit, they could be left with no choice. The Irish would face huge pressure from the rest of the EU to begin enforcing customs procedures and tariffs on the border. This is exactly what the backstop and May's deal were trying to prevent, but both appear to be too unpopular to actually pass. One of the key promises during the referendum vote was that the UK would be able to stop sending money to the EU. If there was a no-deal Brexit, the UK would likely immediately stop paying the EU. The UK's £13 billion contribution to the EU budget would halt, allowing the UK to send money elsewhere. However, the UK would also stop receiving money back from the EU, such as the £3 billion subsidy going to UK farmers. Though the UK is set to save money by ending their contributions to the EU, it's not as big a saving as some buses might have claimed. And many argue that the money saved would be outweighed by the amount the UK is set to lose through decreased trade with the EU. All EU laws would automatically be transferred into UK laws, and then the UK is free to amend, adjust and repeal these laws over time. This means that all laws would remain exactly the same, at least initially after a hard Brexit, meaning there wouldn't be any holes in the UK's law book. As I mentioned at the start, we're already working on a video to explain why some people are happy with the idea of a no-deal Brexit. In December, we asked people to email in the reasons why they're happy to support a no-deal Brexit, and we received a load of emails. If you haven't contributed yet and you feel strongly about the topic, send us a message to hello@tldrnews.co.uk with the subject line, "In Defence of No Deal." If you enjoyed this video, make sure you're subscribed and following us across Instagram, Facebook and Twitter to stay fully up to date.